News of the times. The policeman who saw Jack the Ripper then was murdered in Whitechapel. Welcome to News of the Times. A constable on his very first solo beat makes a chilling discovery: the freshly murdered body of Frances Coles, the final name on the Whitechapel murders file. Some believed she may have been the Ripper's last victim. That constable was Ernest Thompson. But what makes this story even more haunting is what happened next. Just a few years later, P.C. Thompson would be brutally stabbed to death in the same East End streets he once patrolled in search of a killer. Was it a senseless act of violence, or did echoes of the Ripper's shadow linger far longer than anyone expected? In this episode, we trace the extraordinary and tragic tale of the policeman who may have looked Jack the Ripper in the eye and paid the ultimate price. And in our end of episode further particulars segment, what happens when a Victorian juror refuses to deliver a verdict without being paid? Chaos, candleless confinement, and a full-blown standoff in the courtroom ensue. Mr. Wilson, tradesman and amateur philosopher of public compensation, locked horns with the legal system in a scene worthy of farce, insisting that if others are paid to sit about doing nothing, he jolly well should be too. A masterclass in stubbornness, in 1830s justice, and the art of being a monumental nuisance with a point. Now, if you enjoy grim Victorian murders, obstinate jurymen with delusions of grandeur, and the sort of courtroom drama where someone nearly has to be dragged from the jury box, do the noble thing, like, subscribe, and share this episode with a fellow oddball who appreciates the weirder chapters of British history. Go on, give it a watch. It's cheaper than jury duty and far less likely to get you locked in a room without candles. On a cold, dark night in Whitechapel, Friday the 13th of February 1892, Police Constable Ernest Thompson made a discovery that would haunt him forever: the bloodied body of Frances Coles, throat slashed, still warm. When P.C. Ernest Thompson first spotted the bloodied figure of Frances Coles on his debut patrol, he couldn't have known that he, too, would one day bleed out on those same streets, holding tight to a killer, whispering his final words. Some believe Coles was the Ripper's final victim, the last name recorded in the official Whitechapel murders file. Others argue the killer had vanished years earlier, but P.C. Thompson was now part of that legacy, whether he wanted to be or not. What he couldn't have known was that fate wasn't finished with him, and just a few years later, Thompson himself would be brutally murdered on the very streets he once patrolled, his life ending in violence, just like the woman he found that night. From witness to victim, his story is a chilling echo of London's darkest days. Police Constable Ernest Thompson was just 35 years old when his life was cut short. A quiet, conscientious man, he had served with the Metropolitan Police for 10 years, earning the respect of his fellow officers as a steady and trustworthy presence on the streets of Stepney. Stationed at Arbour Square, he lived with his wife and children on Jane Street near Commercial Road. By all accounts, Thompson was inoffensive by nature, punctual, diligent, and never the subject of complaint. Bernard Abrahams was a 41-year-old cigar maker living at 11 Chicksand Street in Mile End, Newtown, at the time of his arrest for the murder of Police Constable Ernest Thompson. He stated that he had been born in London and at the time of the crime he was living with his mother and his two orphaned nieces, whom he supported on his earnings of 30 shillings per week. When called to give evidence in his own defence, Abrahams was described as a man of small stature with prominent cheekbones. He was known locally as a quiet man with no criminal convictions. The quiet respect Thompson had earned during his years on the force would not shield him from what was coming. Just before dawn on the 1st of December 1900, in the very heart of Whitechapel, Thompson once again crossed paths with violence. This time, he would not walk away. From the Lloyd's Weekly newspaper of the 2nd of December 1900, shocking murder in Whitechapel, policeman stabbed to death. A police constable who distinguished himself at the time of the Jack the Ripper murders in Whitechapel was yesterday morning stabbed to death. It seems that at about 1:30 a.m, Constable William Thompson was attracted to a few loiterers in the neighbourhood of a coffee stall in Union Street off Commercial Road East. There was a scuffle and one of the men, Barnett Abrahams, attacked the officer, stabbing him twice in the neck. The assailant was taken to Leman Street Police Court. At his first court appearance, Abrahams was found bruised and battered from the altercation. His solicitor requested a delay until after the inquest, and the hearing was postponed accordingly. Prisoner in court. At the Thames Police Court yesterday, Bernard Abrahams, aged 41, a cigar maker, resident at 50 Newark Street in Whitechapel, was charged with feloniously killing and slaying Police Constable Ernest Thompson by stabbing him in the neck with a knife while in the execution of his duty. The prisoner is a man of small stature with prominent cheekbones. He was observed to be suffering from 2 black eyes, a broken nose and a burst ear, and told his solicitor there were bruises all over his body. Police story of the crime. According to the police evidence against the prisoner of having been the cause of the constable's death is very clear. Their full story of the crime shows that Thompson, who was considered by his comrades a most inoffensive man, was going on his usual round yesterday morning. At the coffee stall at the corner of Church Lane, he saw the prisoner with 2 women. He asked them to move on, and Abrahams did so very slowly and hesitatingly. The prisoner went off in the direction of Bow, while the women turned toward Aldgate. This much was witnessed by the coffee stall keeper, who, however, did not see what is alleged to have subsequently happened. Abrahams, on reaching the bottom of the street at its junction with Commercial Road, took out a knife from his pocket and walked towards the policeman, who had been coming in the same direction. Then, as is alleged, he attacked Thompson, plunging the knife into the policeman's neck. It is the custom to remove prisoners from Leman Street Police Station to the Arbour Square Court at about 1 o'clock in the morning, and yesterday morning some half a dozen policemen were in charge of the removal of prisoners. They were passing on the other side of Commercial Road when they saw Thompson struggling with Abrahams, and one of them says he saw the prisoner's hand descending on Thompson's neck, although he was too far off to see any instrument. 2 of these policemen at once went to their comrades' assistance, and one of them is said to have seen the prisoner throw away a knife. It is at least beyond doubt that an ordinary 3-inch blade pocket knife, covered from tip to haft with warm blood was picked up close to where the policeman and the prisoner were struggling. Thompson was at once seen to be in a serious condition. His neck and clothes were covered with gore. He had a tight hold on his man, but almost immediately his mates came. He seemed to collapse, and loosening his grip, he said with great difficulty, "Hold him. I'm done." The prisoner's defence. Abrahams proposed to give evidence at the inquest on Monday before Coroner Baxter, and will also be represented by his solicitor, Mr. Deakin. His defence will, it is said, to be on the effect that while larking with two women near the coffee stall in Commercial Road, Constable Thompson ordered Abrahams to move on, and because he did not quickly do so, was attacked by the officer who caused the injuries from which he was suffering. He then used the knife to protect himself and had no intention of causing fatal injuries. The man who saw the Ripper. Thompson, the deceased policeman, was about 35 years of age. He was probably the only man, certainly the only constable, who ever saw Jack the Ripper. The last crime the Ripper is credited with took place in Swallow Square, which was on Thompson's beat. 10 minutes before he found a woman's body, which was quite warm when it was discovered, he saw the woman with a man whom he, however, did not seem sufficiently to recognise. Thompson was married, and he leaves a widow and 3 children, the eldest only 4 years old. The deceased officer always evinced the keenest interest in the Jack the Ripper mystery, and never wearied in his efforts to bring the arch-murderer to justice. The inquest into Thompson's death opened to considerable public attention. Crowds gathered early, and tensions were already high by the time the accused arrived under heavy guard. From the Lloyd's Weekly newspaper, the 9th of December 1900, the murder of a policeman, prisoner's complaint of injury. On Monday at the London hospital, Mr. Baxter opened the inquest on the body of Ernest Thompson, aged 32, lately residing at 1 Princess Street, Commercial Road, who was stabbed to death in Whitechapel early on December the 1st. The court was crowded during the hearing. For quite an hour before the commencement of the proceedings, large crowds gathered outside the main entrance to the court, and when Barnet Abrahams, the cigar maker, who is in custody on the charge of murdering the deceased, drove up in charge of 2 warders, he was loudly hooted and hissed. Abraham was legally represented by a Mr. C. Deakin. Dr. Hilliard, house surgeon at the London hospital, said that the deceased constable was brought into the hospital about 1:30 a.m. on December the 1st. He was then dead at the coroner's inquest, and he made a post-mortem examination of the body. He found a punctured wound on the left side of the neck at about 1 inch below the angle of the jaw. It was about 3/4 of an inch long, sloping downwards and inwards, and passed into the internal jugular, almost severing the artery. The hemorrhage, which had been very great, the sharp end of the instrument by which the wound had been made had gone in uppermost. Death was due to the cutting of the vessels in the neck. All the organs were healthy. It was noted as the wound was downward, it would have required to be a taller man than the deceased to afflict it. At the inquest, testimony from a coffee stall keeper and his son described Abrahams as sober and not visibly injured prior to the altercation. Both confirmed that Thompson followed Abrahams after asking him to move on. As the butcher's account concluded, one of the responding officers took the stand to describe the immediate aftermath of the attack. Constable Albert Pims, 100H, spoke to answering a police whistle, and finding the deceased kneeling on the accused and holding him, the witness saw blood pouring out from the left side of the deceased's neck. He was then unconscious. He was still holding the prisoner. His hold was so tight that it took another constable and myself some seconds before we could release it. We drove him to the London hospital, but he died before getting there. The deceased had not been using his truncheon, as it was found in the usual place. The accused had no injuries on the face when I saw him lying on the ground. At the final inquest hearing, the prisoner, Barnett Abrahams, appeared in significantly better condition than during his earlier court appearances. Medical testimony confirmed he had suffered several injuries, including bruising, a head wound, and a minor knife cut to the chin, most of which were consistent with the struggle and subduing force. Importantly, the blood covering his clothing did not originate from his own wounds. Abraham's wounds, sustained after securing him, not custody, did not gather and garner sympathy with the jury, who had little difficulty in finding him guilty of the death of P.C. Thompson. From the Lloyd's Weekly newspaper, the 16th of December 1900, the murder of a policeman. Inquest and verdict. Mr. Baxter concluded his inquiry at Limehouse on Monday with reference to the death of Constable Ernest Thompson, 240H, attached to Leman Street in Whitechapel, who was stabbed to death in Commercial Road East on the 21st inst. Barnett Abrahams, the cigar maker who is charged with the murder of the policeman, was present in the custody of two warders from Holloway Jail. He presented a much better appearance than before, his black eyes having almost disappeared and his other injuries healed up. Dr. Thomas Jones, divisional surgeon of 68 Leman Street, stated that he examined the prisoner at the police station at about 2 o'clock on the Saturday morning and found that he had an injury on the right parietal bone and a large bruise on the left shoulder, which might have been caused by blows with a truncheon. There was a swelling on the left side of the head, due probably to a fall, two black eyes, the result of a blow with the fist, and a small incised wound on the chin, which appeared to have been done with a knife. There was a considerable quantity of blood about the prisoner's clothing, but this had not come from his wounds, which were not serious. The jury returned a verdict of wilful murder against Mr. Barnett Abrahams and added, "We desire to thank the police for the very lucid and straightforward manner in which they have given their evidence." The trial was followed keenly across the UK, not only because of the murder of a policeman, but also because of P.C. Thompson's connection with the Ripper. The prosecution presented several witnesses. Although Abrahams claimed self-defense and cited anti-Semitic provocation, the jury remained unswayed. From the Eastern Post, the 9th of February 1901, the Whitechapel tragedy, verdict of manslaughter, Abrahams sentenced 20 years penal servitude. At the Central Criminal Court on Tuesday, before Mr. Justice Phillimore, Barnett Abrahams, 41, cigar maker, was indicted for the wilful murder of Police Constable Thompson. Mr. Avery, in opening the case, said the prisoner lived at 50 Newark Street in Commercial Road, and at about 20 minutes past 1 on the morning of the 1st of December, he was with two women at a coffee stall in the street. Thompson, the deceased officer came suddenly on the spot, and he requested the prisoner and the women to move on. The women went in one direction and the prisoner toward his own home. The officer seemed to have followed the prisoner. He stopped at the corner of Union Street. He was then seen to rush at Thompson, who closed with him, and he was seen to strike the officer a blow on the left side of the neck. Both men fell in the roadways, and the prisoner, being under the officer and some constables who were passing, ran to the assistance of their colleague. It was found that Thompson had been stabbed on the left side of his neck, and he died in the cab on the way to the hospital. The other constables set the prisoner on his legs, but he was so violent that one of the constables struck him with his truncheon, and another constable hit him with his fist before he could be subdued. A knife with blood on it was found on the ground where the prisoner had been lying. When taken to the police station, the prisoner said it was quite possible he had done it, but he did not remember anything about it. He had no reason or cause to do an injury to anybody. Later, when the charge was being taken, the prisoner said, "I did it. It was an unlucky moment for me. May his soul rest in peace. I regret it, but it can't be helped." The defence. Morris Barnett and other witnesses were called to speak of the prisoner's character as a quiet, peaceable man. After Mr. Avery for the prosecution had summed up, Mr. Gill proceeded his defence, urging that the real facts of the case were involved in considerable obscurity. He stated that the prosecution had been compelled to rely largely upon police evidence and upon men who belonged to the same division of police as the deceased, and who naturally would be greatly prejudiced in his favour. The more probable story, he stated, was that told by the prisoner. What right had the deceased to interfere with the prisoner at the coffee stall? There was no doubt the constable did hector the prisoner and push him along and behave towards him in a manner likely to exasperate anybody. In the struggle which followed, it was quite likely that the stab might have been accidentally given, or it might have been given in the falling of the two men. If the constable was exceeding his duty in interfering with the prisoner, the offence, if the jury should be of an opinion that the deceased dealt the blow, would be a manslaughter only. Mr. Justice Fillmore, summing up the case to the jury, asked whether it was in accordance with common sense that such an injury could have been inflicted accidentally. As to the provocation which would have justified the use of the knife, the prisoner said when he was arrested that he had no reason or cause to do any injury to anybody. The jury, after an absence of 40 minutes, returned to court with a verdict of guilty of manslaughter. Mr. Justice Fillmore, addressing the jury, said he did not disagree with the verdict. The crime was a very great act, that if the prisoner had not been treated as such, the provocation was slight, and he sentenced the prisoner to 20 years penal servitude. Further particulars. From one courtroom tragedy to a rather different sort of judicial drama. As our episode closes, we step away from Whitechapel's dark alleyways and into the wood-panelled chaos of a Victorian courtroom, where a most reluctant juryman decided he would not be rendering a verdict until someone agreed to pay him for his time. What followed was one of the most extraordinary standoffs in British legal history. From the London Standard, the 3rd of January, 1838. As soon as the jury had been sworn to try the defendant, Mr. H. Wilson, one of the jury, addressed the court and said, "I should like to know, Mr. Chairman, how I am to be indemnified for my loss of time and the trouble and inconvenience I'm putting to it by coming here." The chairman, to the deputy clerk of the peace, said, Go on with the case. Let it proceed." Mr. Wilson, "Go on. Aye, it's all very well you say go on, but I won't go on until I know who is to pay me for my loss of time." The chairman stated, "You are summoned here, sir, for the purpose of discharging an exceedingly important and essential public duty, and every person who attends here for the same purpose does so at all times without receiving any remuneration for their service thus publicly rendered. All the gentlemen who are now on the bench with myself attend here without any fee or reward." Mr. Wilson replied, Yes, that's all very true, but it is a very different thing in my case. Thus, gentlemen, seek the appointment as a matter of honour, whilst with me my attendance is a matter of compulsion. I am forced to come here, and they come here by their own inclination. The chairman, "I believe it is universally admitted that the trial by jury is one of the most beautiful parts of our admirable Constitution, and it is a part of that Constitution that in every criminal case the jury trying the prisoner shall do so without any compensation or remuneration for their services, and deeply indeed should I regret that any alteration of the law in that respect should take place. For if in criminal trials juries were to be paid for their attendance, parties would become candidates for the situation instead of so great and important a public duty being, as in the fact now, performed by independent men." Mr. Wilson, Aye, that's all very well, I dare say, but other public servants are paid, aye, and very well paid too, and sometimes for doing little or nothing. I object, therefore, on principle, to perform what is termed public duty, and to being kept here all day without, like those other persons, being paid for my loss of time and trouble. The chairman, I must not hear any more of these observations, to the deputy clerk of the peace. Let the case proceed. The trial then went on. The case was one of a trivial nature. The chairman having summed up the evidence, the jury proceeded to the consideration thereof after a short consultation. The foreman, addressing the court, said, "Sir, the juryman who has already addressed you says he will not agree to any verdict without he shall have been paid or obtain a promise of being paid for his attendance here today." The chairman, I trust that the gentleman will not persist in such improper conduct. Mr. Wilson, I shall, though, for I do so with the view of obtaining redress for what I consider to be an extreme grievance and a great hardship upon the tradesman. The chairman, very well, sir. I can only tell you that you and your brother juryman will be locked up until you agree in your verdicts. Pray, sir, are you aware of the position in which you stand? You have taken a solemn oath on the gospel that you will well and truly try the prisoner at the bar and a true verdict give. Now, having heard the evidence in the present case, you are bound by the oath you have taken to give your verdict. Recollect, by your oath you have solemnly sworn to decide on the case. Mr. Wilson, smiling, Yes, I know that, but you will remember that I did not swear when or at what time I would do so. I did not, by my oath, say at what time I would agree to a verdict. The chairman: Let an officer be sworn, and let him take the jury into another room, and let him there lock them up and keep them as usual without fire and candle until they come to some determination in this case. They must agree as to a verdict. Nearly the whole of the jury instantly expressed their objection to be locked up in a case where the fact was so clear. They complained loudly that they should be locked up in consequence of the obstinacy of only one of their body, especially where the case did not admit of a doubt. Chairman: I cannot help you. I am very sorry that the conduct of one of your own body should render you being locked up a matter of necessity. However, I will take care that he shall not gain anything by his conduct. Mr. Wilson: Can you prove, sir, that I am acting illegally? That's all. Only show me the law that says how long a jury is to be allowed to consider their verdict. Only point out to me the law which states any particular time a jury are to take in the consideration of their verdict. That is what I want to see. A juryman addressing Mr. Wilson: What is it that you want? Mr. Wilson: I want nothing of you. I am defending here what I conceive to be a great public principle, and am extremely glad, am I, at having the opportunity to do so. My position is this. I contend that if the performance of one species, one class of the public service is to be paid for, all the other classes, however humble the parties may be who perform the service, have an equal right to payment. The court tells me I am summoned here to discharge a public duty, and I therefore insist that being the case, the public shall pay me. Let the chairman, if he can, show me a law which proves that the conduct I am at this moment pursuing is illegal. Chairman: I can, with the greatest truth, state that I never witnessed a scene of this description upon any former occasion in a court of justice, and I trust I shall never again. Officer, you must remove the jury to the other room, and I will not suffer such a disgraceful scene as this to continue in this court for a moment longer. The juryman, with much earnestness, addressing the chairman: Surely, sir, you will not lock up the whole of us? Mr. Wilson: No, that he won't, for I shall not leave this box. A juryman addressing Mr. Wilson: What demand do you make for your services, pray? Mr. Wilson: I tell you once more, I don't want anything of you. I am merely doing what I regard to be a public duty, and am resolved upon pursuing the matter. Several of the jurymen: Oh, let us subscribe and pay him. What charges does he make? The chairman to the officer: Officer, you must do your duty. Take the jury to the other room. Do your duty, sir. Take the jury away. As I have told you, let the other officers assist. During the whole of this scene, the greatest confusion prevailed throughout the court. Not a single party, whether magistrate, counsel, prosecutor, witness, or spectator, but was on his feet, watching with the utmost anxiety the progress of the discussion and the result to which it might chance to lead. As soon as the chairman had issued his last commands, several of the police made their way toward the jury box. Mr. Wilson, who sat himself down in a manner which induced a supposition that he would not quit the jury box, without the application of force, rose, and again addressing himself to the chairman said, "Sir, you have not shown me that I am acting illegally. I shall not therefore leave this box. I will not quit it until you do." The chairman: "I tell you, sir, that you are behaving not merely disgracefully, but illegally." Mr. Wilson: "Well, then show me how. Show me the statute. I should wish to see that." The chairman: "Officers, do your duty. Clear that box instantly. I must put an end to this proceeding." The officers of the court now went up to the jury box, when Mr. Wilson quietly walked out and accompanied the others of the jury into the adjoining room. After an absence of rather more than a quarter of an hour, the jury again entered the court, when they said that they had agreed to a verdict, which was that the defendant was guilty. The chairman told the jury that they must remain in court until they were again called upon, and at the rising of the court they were dismissed. That concludes this episode of News of the Times. If you enjoy grim Victorian murders, obstinate jurymen with a delusion of grandeur, and courtroom drama where someone has to be nearly dragged from the jury box, do the noble thing. Like, subscribe, and share this episode with a fellow oddball who appreciates the stranger chapters of British history. It keeps the YouTube algorithm at bay and prevents us from being locked in a candleless jury room. For those willing to go the extra mile and possibly commit mild time travel with us, support us on Patreon. Over 600 episodes await, documentaries, podcasts, and the occasional weak stab at humour. Link in the other show notes. This has been News of the Times, and I am Robin Coles, chronicler of crime and committed time traveller. And as ever, and the last person out, please remember to blow out the candle.